Hello, I'm Mandy Rutter. I'm a psychologist and counsellor, and I've been working in the area of supporting people after traumatic injury for about 25 years. My role has actually been as a psychologist in employee assistance programs, and my area of work really has been supporting employees when they have been involved in incidents and crashes, and when they have had really difficult and life-changing injuries. My work has been involved me supporting people after September the 11th and July the 7th bombings. I've also been involved in working with people who've been involved in construction incidents, and also those employees who've worked in banks and pubs where they have been often had very extreme injuries, often by members of the public. I've also worked with the rail industry, where there have been drivers of trains who've had really difficult psychological injuries when unfortunately there's been people on the track. So a whole range of injuries that I have been involved with in relation to people. So what I'd like to talk about today is how I've done that support, but also how the workplace can really provide huge amounts of resources in order to help people who've been affected by injuries with their financial situation. And then actually part of my job, which I just wanted to touch on at the end, has been about ensuring that the organisation that a person has worked for responds with a sense of sensitivity and compassion to that person who's been affected. Right, so let's start with talking about people. And how I like to sort of think about this is following all sorts of the research to recognise that people involved in really difficult injuries, when we think about life-changing injuries, think about the word change and think about life-changing injury, which means the change is a process that they go through. So the change that is experiencing is absolutely, it's going to start with a shock. Gosh, what's happening to me? I can't believe this is happening. Then some sense of sort of like the feelings of sadness, of loss, of difficulty really come in after that. Then begin to ask sort of the cognitive stuff of asking questions. You know, what happened? Why me? When did this go on? And then some sense of needing understanding and integration. Again, a sort of cognitive process of understanding that. But each person has their own sense of individual recovery after a life-changing injury. And what we would look at then is, you know, that the natural sort of flow of recovery you know, is done helped by colleagues, helped by family, helped by friends. But actually, after a period of time, if people are still experiencing some really difficult symptoms, maybe struggling with depression to anxiety, then we look at potentially looking at a slightly more clinical diagnosis of maybe PTSD or really deep sort of depression or anxiety. So what we've got is, as each different psychological phase, we've got a response, a different sort of clinical interjection, if you like. What we experience when people have experienced shock is we want those first response, which is often from hospital, paramedics, maybe from, you know, really intense sort of family support there. But after that, people begin to have all sorts of feelings. They feel, you know, hugely angry or sad, or feeling like withdrawn. And at that time, we need to have some psychological first aid. And a lot of our research says that psychological first aid, I like to describe that as the ABC psychological first aid. So attend to basic needs with a sense of compassion. But then people sometimes might need more than that. They're beginning to be cognitively much more aware of what's happened, asking questions. And with the questions, we need to listen, we need to acknowledge, we need to educate. But then in relation to that needing some sense of understanding and integration, we need an individual trauma support, an individual tailored response to people. And that sort of individual recovery, we need to just monitor and check that that is sort of in line with what we would expect from the situation that people have been through. And then, of course, not everyone, but some people will experience ongoing symptoms, ongoing flashbacks, ongoing intrusive thoughts, maybe an ongoing sense of their mood disorder, and therefore we would potentially be looking at PTSD or another sort of clinical issue that would really affecting their recovery. And then we're looking at CBT, maybe so cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, or psychotherapy, all sort of all sort of recognized through our NICE guidelines. So that sort of, it's really important to tailor our response to each individual person, but also to the timeline of their recovery. Now, when we think about helping people after traumatic injury, we need to look at some of the risk factors and some of the protective factors. And just be mindful that the backdrop that I work in is the person has been part of a workplace. So had colleagues, had managers, had directors. So often in our risk and protective factors for people, we can think about what are the risks, that looking at the person in their context, in their environment, what are the risks that's going to make make recovery much more difficult, but what are some of the protective factors that maybe the workplace can help for the person? So some of the risk factors, if the crisis and the incident has been a long time, has been over a long period of time, has been repeated. So some people who have been involved maybe in a bank raid, what happens is that they may have been held up, they may have been held hostage, maybe for hours and hours. That's a prolonged crisis. That means that actually recovery, is sometimes takes a long time. Repeated, so time after time after time. If you've worked sometimes in a bank, you may actually have a bank raid, not just once, but twice or 3 times or 4 times over the period of your working life. If there is both physical injury and psychological injury, that takes much longer to recover. So, assault and crash, plus the sort of at that point the impact of our feelings, of our anxieties, of our worries, plus high levels of existing stress at the time of the incident really causes quite difficult recovery time. Previous ill health, so if a person has really struggled with other symptoms and other conditions, or involved in a recent significant life event, maybe someone else in their family had died, maybe they just got married, maybe they just had a baby, all sorts of significant events can really add to the risk. And then a sense of isolation. So one of the things about isolation is that people don't have their family and their friends around them. Also, in terms of the supportive network, let's have a think for a minute. In terms of isolation, people need around them to have people they can talk to, that they can value, that they can really, that remind them that they're human beings and they're not just the product of, the incident that has happened. So in terms of protective factors, supportive network of families, supportive network of colleagues, this is where the workplace comes in, asking the workplace to keep in touch. Good relationships with managers, line managers, again for line managers to keep in touch. Good physical health helps us after an incident, an understanding of resilience, an ability to articulate our emotions, plus a sense of realistic optimism that we will recover, but with support. So as we go through this, so those are some of the things we think about with the people, but what about, our managers, the colleagues, those people impacted by it? And what we try and do in a workplace that has been affected by an injury, by a crash, is that we take the groups of people that are there to support, maybe HR, line managers, senior managers, and we do a nice sort of like matrix of support. Like, how can we help, those people in the workplace look at the immediate after effects of supporting people, promoting well-being, communicating with families, mobilizing support services. And those support services might include occupational health, might include HR, might include the employee assistance program, but also, having a discussion about finances, what's available to them. Plus, of course, private healthcare if they have that. One of the things that really helps people who've been involved in really difficult incidents is if they've had a good relationship with their workplace, to keep in contact. How do they keep in contact when the language is difficult? People find it a struggle to talk to people who've been impacted by a life-changing event. But actually what we can do is train our line managers, HR, senior leaders to maintain contact, which has such a good impact and can be so positive for people affected. So what about the organisation? How can we encourage organisations to respond with a sense of compassion to one of their employees or a group of employees who has been impacted by such, serious trauma? here's some best practice, that it's important that we help the organization respond immediately, respond timely, respond from a biological, so care, psychological, mind, and social community, from a biopsychosocial response. Acknowledge how difficult this has been rather than denying it, and providing some education and guidance about how to manage it. But also we need to help people understand their legal duty of care, their financial duty of care, so that actually employees who are affected by long-term changes, by the long-term trauma, feel that the place they worked thinks about them, provides them some support, and offers that connectedness. So I guess the last thing that I just want to offer you is that one of the things when we've had a life-changing injury is that the relationship that you have with your workplace can really add to your sense of recovery. And just a couple of really significant and quite emotional testimonies from people are that their workplace can help them feel like they're not just a victim, but they really have a sense of value, that their job is still there for them, that there's an optimism that they will recover and get back to the relationships that they had with people. Thank you very much.